Okay, hi everybody. I am here with Heather Lafferty from Habitat for Humanity. She is the CEO, is that right, Heather?
That's right.
CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Metro Denver, which is a longtime mission partner for Wellshire. And we partner with some other churches with an organization called Carpenters Helpers to get a house built every year. We've been doing that for a very long time, and we're so thankful for the opportunity to work with you and to share in the great work that you do in our communities. Our theme this year for Advent as a church is home. And the idea is that where we come from matters. We're actually looking at the four gospels and thinking of them as homes, and the way that those stories are told differently. The same stories, the stories of Jesus, are told differently depending on the context of when and where that gospel was written. So where our stories come from matter, our homes matter. And so we're so excited that we have long been partnering with you, and we know that you know better than anyone the importance of home and where we come from. So wanted to check in with you about Habitat. For those who don't know about Habitat for Humanity, can you give us the quick description of what you guys do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me and allowing me to talk about my favorite thing, which is home, and to say thank you to you and the team at Wellshire and your entire congregation for understanding the importance of home this Advent season. We have learned over the last few months that our home is our everything, and it has become a place where our kids are going to school, and it's our restaurants, it's our gym, it's our library, it's our recreation, it's everything. And so thank you for putting an emphasis on this, because there are far too many people in our community who need a good place to call home. And we can talk about that in a few minutes. But to answer your question, who we are at Habitat. So at Habitat, we are focused on providing low and moderate income households with the opportunity to buy an affordable home. And we do this by building and preserving affordable housing in our community. And then we're a mortgage lender. And this is what most people don't know about Habitat, but we are a mortgage lender. And so we're building and preserving affordable housing. And we're also providing an affordable loan. And that ability for a household to become homeowners has a tremendous impact. I often talk about housing provides stability, homeownership provides economic mobility. And so that combination is life-changing. It's transformational for families who don't have that opportunity without a partnership with Habitat.
Yes, thank you. And it is so important in our homes right now, as you know, we're doing this from our homes,
Exactly.
talking to each other. But we are familiar at Wellshire with volunteering on Habitat sites. And I don't know how much that's been happening this year. Talk to us about how Habitat is doing in 2020 in the face of the pandemic, and what are some of the biggest changes for Habitat this year?
Well, just like everybody right now, we have pivoted. Wellshire has pivoted. I'm sure many of the people in your congregations have, kind of set their businesses or their work, and certainly their families and schools. And Habitat's not been immune to that. Early on, it was tough. We had to really slow down our construction work, as well as close down our restores. And that had a really challenging financial impact on the organization. But fortunately, we've been able to bring that back up online, both literally in our stores as well as online for our retail operations. And our construction program, we have been able to get that back working. And we've been able to use volunteers for most of the summer. Now, obviously, as things are getting a little bit more out of control again, we are paring back on that. But the basics are that we remain doing business, focused on getting these homes built and repaired, because we have families who need them. So our staff is working incredibly hard. We miss our volunteers. We miss our faithful coalition volunteers. And yet the work has to go on. And so it's costing us a little bit more money. to build our homes because we don't have our volunteer force out
Right.
there. But we are committed to keeping our commitments to our families and to our community partners to get these homes done.
And you really build in Metro Denver, where I think all of us have experienced the housing prices just go up and up and up and up.
Yeah, the average single family home now in Denver is over $600,000. We are the 5th most expensive state in the country to be able to buy a home. And you need a household income of more than $100,000 in order to be able to purchase the average home in our state. And Denver's, I think, the 9th most expensive metro area or city in the country. And so the challenge is that, while our housing prices have increased so much, our incomes really haven't. A few years ago, we were looking at housing price increases of about 72% over a 5-year period. And during that same period, incomes rose only about 12%. And so it's really that delta between the cost of homes going up and what average incomes are that's creating the most challenge for so many of our working families in our community.
And then working now is such a challenge, and the job market has changed so much in the past 8 months, 9 months.
Yeah, we're seeing such a bigger impact on low and low moderate income households, to have hours cut, to have jobs eliminated, to have people needing to work on the front line in situations where they have to choose between working and taking care of somebody who is sick at home or might be extra vulnerable, and so really needing to make impossible choices. Are their children home trying to do homeschool by themselves, or are parents cutting back on their hours or needing to stay at home? So this has been just a real challenging time. The disparity for those at the lower income levels has been great. And that's where we know housing provides stability. And we know that by providing more and more families with an opportunity to become a homeowner means that stability is in place and provides the foundation from which so much else is possible and needed.
Yeah. So we are at Wellshire, we are also kind of trying to take on learning about systems more than we have in the past. Wellshire has such a wonderful history of generosity and charity. And we're also trying to now step into the space of like, okay, well, what is making people poor? And how can we help with those root causes? And just understanding systemic poverty. We also are talking about structural racism, not like one-on-one personal stuff, but what is in the structure of our society that causes inequity. So we're doing a lot of good learning on that. And I wanted to hear a little bit about if you could say more about the impact of, one system is our housing market, which we've talked about a little bit. And what's the impact when someone has stable home?
Yeah. Well, first, when you talk about institutional and structural racism, unfortunately, housing is one of the biggest contributors to the inequality that so many people faced historically and also continues today. When you think about what housing is, it is the opportunity for so many, especially home ownership, to create wealth. And yet redlining and our history of segregation in this community and so many policies that our government had in place that were inherently racist and created the segregation meant that generations of Black and Brown and people of color, their households and their communities were not able to accumulate the wealth that housing really allowed so many of those of us who look like you and I, Katie, to have, our families and the generation, what that then means. We know today that Black households have 1/10 the wealth that white households have. And the home ownership rate in Colorado for Blacks is half that for what it is for white households. And so when you think about, those two things together, and what it means for so many people today in terms of not having a safety net going through a pandemic,
Right.
not having the ability to have stability and security and affordability in their housing. And when you look at our history as a country, it's sad to say that, for far too long, we allowed things to take place that really were challenging for far too many communities. As you think here in Denver, I think about the neighborhoods where, if you think about the upside down L in Denver, and the neighborhoods that, have the most, or the least, I should say, infrastructure investment, and, the most challenging neighborhoods for far too many people, has been because of redlining. And so that still exists today. And it's an organization who has our roots. Many people know us as a Christian organization, and our roots as a Christian organization, which is true. We're also based in social justice. And a lot of the Christian roots, came from Blacks and whites working together in the Deep South in the 60s to ensure that everybody in their community could have housing. And that still is alive and well with us today. And it is part of what we are focused on. And partners like Wellshire, who embrace that with us, make such a difference in our ability to be able to provide households, families, individuals, and their neighborhoods with housing stability.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You and I have kids. We talked about that a little bit before we started recording, and we all the parents out there are talking about remote schooling. Is your kid in person? Yeah. Is your kid at home? And I know one of the things we've worked on with our elementary school partner is access to technology. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are worried about widening educational gaps for kids. And I did see one of the stories of one of your families who's working on a house now, and her young children, and how great it's going to be for them to be able to have just a warm, safe place with power, with internet connectivity, so that they can do school.
Yeah.
So it's these systems kind of build on each other.
They do.
Yeah.
And that's where, it kind of goes back to where we started and talking about our home. We always knew housing was important, but I think, there's been such a spotlight on that. It's incredibly hard to shelter in place when you don't have a good place. So when that place is physically unsafe or has other ramifications to it. So it really is challenging when you don't have that. And so many of us take for granted what we do have. And I think the holiday season, excuse me, speaking of child, as if
wonderful
you
kiddos
here
at home
needs a finger to make his technology work.
That's right.
That's a perfect example. And he knows he'll always get a fingerprint when I'm online and don't have time to say, what are you doing? But anyway, I digress. And just saying that so many of us take this for granted. And when you don't have a good home, it's all you can think about. And especially during a time like this where you don't have other options. You can't use the library. You can't use, the school. You can't use the places that we as a community, and especially those who are more vulnerable, rely on. And so home becomes the place. And you're right. I mean, the connection between housing and education is so clear. 95% of children growing up in a Habitat home here in the Metro Denver area graduate from high school. Compare that to the statewide high school graduation rate, which is 79%. Now that's pre-pandemic. It'll be scary to think of what it's probably going to be during the pandemic, but that improvement for people who have a good home compared to when kids don't. I'll just share a quick story. There's a young man who just about a year ago, his mom texted me to share some good news. As a family, they had moved 8 times in her son's first 8 years in school. And they moved into their Habitat home out at Sable Ridge just before he was starting his freshman year in high school. he went into high school and, really all of a sudden became focused and was a part of student leadership and joined the basketball team and did all these things he hadn't done before, because previously he always knew he'd have to move and he'd lose his friends and,
Right.
all of that. It just, when you're constantly moving to try to find a more affordable place, you just, all those things for kids are so critical. Well, about a year ago, his mom texted me with some good news that he had received a full ride scholarship to Yale University. And she was over the moon. Indonesia's her name, and Ayanle is son. And she was just so proud. And she said, it's the stability of our home that gave him the foundation for which to, focus on this. And he's at Yale and he is thriving and doing so well. And we couldn't be more proud of him. And he was one of the first and oldest kids in that community. And so now all of those kids have him as a role model to look forward to having those same opportunities with some hard work, of course.
Yeah, right,
but
right.
To me, that just captures the essence of a good home and the connection to education and technology.
Yay. When I started at Wellshire, Margaret Bell invited me to a build day at Sable Ridge.
Okay, you might have worked on his
there
home.
It is. I worked on one of those units. That's awesome. What amazing work. Okay, so that is a story that I'm sure gives you life and motivation in your work life, but just in your life right now, in whether it's in your work or in your home, what is giving you life during these challenging times?
Well, thank you for asking that, because sometimes you do have to stop and ask. For me, it is fortunately my family's been healthy. And I say that I have, parents and who are, at a more vulnerable age, kids who've been in school and could have been exposed. And fortunately, we've been able to stay safe and healthy. And so I just never want to lose perspective of that, because we know far too many people who are on the front lines, who are working so hard to keep everyone safe. And, I just never want to lose perspective of how fortunate we are to have a good home that allows our family to continue life, but a little bit differently, but in a very safe way. Yeah. So that has been personally, very fulfilling. From a professional standpoint, I just have to say our team at Habitat, boy, it has been a tough year, as it has been for so many. And I have seen resiliency in the face of every one of my colleagues, our volunteers who came back, and even those who said, hey, I don't feel safe, but let me find a different way to help. It's just been tremendous, and mostly for our families. Both those who are in the Habitat home and who lost a job and who reached out to say, hey, this has never happened before, but I might need some help, and to have those vulnerable conversations. To those families who are working so hard to get in their home and did it in the face of adversity. So there's just been, when you stop and you look at all of the effort people are putting into life right now, and we benefit from that at Habitat, and that energizes me every day.
Yes, gratitude.
So true.
Gratitude for sure.